couple of days ago, in the first of this two-part series, I started with a dive into a video from someone who is done with dating, tired of its responsibility and protective of peace that's gained from being single. And then I revealed a plot twist about that video and analyzed its viewer comments, which were overwhelmingly supportive. Comments to that person's video agreed with opting out of relationships as wise, healing, self-care, and finally being free. If you haven't already watched part one yet, I'd suggest starting there because it is the full setup, the twist, and the analysis of women's comments about avoiding relationships as it relates to loneliness. It's not absolutely necessary to get the full value out of today's discussion, but I really do suggest starting there if you haven't already seen it, because it'll give today's discussion more perspective, and what I'll cover today will be a spoiler of sorts. In fact, I'll put a card for that video up here in the corner for easy access, and I'll put a link in a pinned comment as well. Now in part two, I want to move beyond that one video about loneliness and into the broader public framing about the so-called loneliness epidemic. I will circle back to part one here as we go along as well. First, what I'm going to do is analyze what Google has to say about the male loneliness epidemic versus a female loneliness epidemic. And then we'll look at the broader writing from the loneliness video creator that I reviewed in part one. And I want to do that to better understand how that dating and loneliness video, or lonely video, whatever you want to call it, fits into a larger worldview about men, authority, self-trust, and women's disengagement. So let's focus on what's being fed to the public about men's and women's loneliness. Now, to get this understanding, I kept the process very basic. I searched male loneliness epidemic and female loneliness epidemic in Google, and then compared the three parallel sections that Google returned for both searches. Now, I realize that this is not entirely formal, but because it is so public-facing, I think it's important. My intention was not, obviously, to treat Google as a definitive authority or research source, because that would be just stupid. But what I wanted to do was examine the public-facing response from Google that a typical person is likely to be given. In fact, do me this favor. Go to Google and put in the same search terms of male loneliness epidemic, see what it has to say, and then do the same thing with female loneliness epidemic, and leave a comment about whether you get the same results that I got. Here's an examination of those three sections that I got from Google, what they had returned. Defining what it means, and then framing loneliness, its causes and drivers, and then how men and women should respond or how they might want to resolve loneliness. Now, I'll put these comparative overlays up side by side, one at a time and side by side as I go, and you can read them. But I realize that it will be a little bit of a challenge if you're watching on your cell phone. I'll do the best I can. Let's start with definition and framing. First is Google's framing of male loneliness epidemic as a documented rise in isolation and lack of deep connection among men, with an emphasis on structural and cultural barriers that prevent men from forming or maintaining meaningful bonds. Female loneliness epidemic is described as more emotional disconnection, where women may still have social networks, partners, and visible relationships, but feel unseen, supported, and even emotionally alone. So the male version is framed more externally and structurally. Men lack friends, intimacy, and social infrastructure. Meanwhile, the female version is presented more internally and relationally. That is, women may have people around them, but the connection does not feel emotionally meaningful to them. And that difference is an indirect social, if not moral difference. Men's loneliness is a deficit in men's social lives, while female loneliness is a deficit in the quality of other people's emotional presence. In plain terms, men are lonely because they lack connection. Women are lonely because the connection available to them is inadequate. Now let's analyze the two other sections that Google gives to explain why loneliness happens and how to move forward toward connection. This comment section right here is the causes and drivers. So this is the explanation for why men and women experience loneliness. For men, Google gives root causes that are described around structural disconnection. For example, it states traditional masculinity at the top of men's loneliness epidemic. And this is one of those obviously blatant ways in which society is programming men and everyone else to think that traditional masculinity is harmful. And to fix it requires men to express fear and sadness as a way to more deeply bond, especially in relationships. It also mentions root causes such as fewer close friendships, weaker communities like clubs and faith groups, declining male spaces, and reduced social vulnerability. Also mentioned is dating markets that leave men feeling unequipped for changing social expectations. Again, men feel lonely or isolated because they're not keeping up with women's expectations in the dating market. The emphasis is on men being cut off from connection or lacking the social tools and social involvement. But for women, Google describes this as unique drivers rather than root causes. Men have causes, women have drivers. According to Google, women's loneliness is driven by hidden loneliness in relationships. That includes feelings of neglect that require her to carry the emotional labor of others, especially in the household. She may be surrounded by people, but feel emotionally neglected, maybe even over responsible or depleted by caretaking, motherhood, marriage, and other social expectations. The emphasis is not that women lack people in their lives. Instead, it's that the relationships they do have are emotionally insufficient or even extract more from women than women receive. And I hope it's not lost on you that this is exactly what we found in that woman's video from part one.
I don't automatically think about what I could gain. I think about what it would cost.
Tired of doing everything for everyone in their life and everyone taking more from and extracting from them. So she gives up. Also listed here is women's higher use of social media as a driver for their loneliness, as is transition into motherhood and caregiving that increases social isolation and removal of sorts from those circles. So according to Google, the contrast is that male loneliness is framed as absence, not enough friends, intimacy, or community, or meaningful support. Female loneliness is framed as overload. Too many roles, expectations, relationships, and emotional duties that do not produce reciprocal connection. Let's talk a little bit about connection and barriers. This next part shows the sharpest divergence, I think. According to Google, for men, this is described as steps they can take toward connection. They're encouraged to embrace vulnerability, which I perceive as reducing masculine values and being more like women. Also included is increasing bonding through hobbies and sports, and actively reaching out to neighbors and other people as a way to build social skills. They're actually telling men to work on social skills to avoid being lonely. Another way for men to connect and reduce their loneliness is to go to therapy, where they can develop the emotional vocabulary to share their feelings, which means go pay somebody to tell you how to talk with women and to them. That'll fix your loneliness. For women, this is described as coping and dealing with structural barriers that are essential for surviving pressures and constraints. Women already have wider support systems and networks, but this says that they internalize distress, they face depression and anxiety, and they're socially pressured to date, marry, and to build families. The emphasis is less on women needing to learn connection like men and more on them needing help to deal with other people's expectations as burdens and emotional consequences. And for good measure about women's loneliness, Google even makes the jab regarding women's loneliness that men may lash out while women internalize, thereby causing them to experience a variety of negative affect. So the contrast is men are given steps to connect, do these things to change, be what we want you to be. Men need to have and be more open, more socially active, more emotionally fluent, and more help seeking. Meanwhile, helping women to cope. Don't learn how to connect like we expect men to, just learn how to deal with them. Women already have connection, but loneliness emerges from distress caused by others and lack of support for their chosen path. And all of this creating asymmetry. Men are presented as underdeveloped in connection and social skills, while women are socially burdened. Men are told to build capacity, women are managing pressure from other people. Now, let's change gears just a little bit. And this is where I wanted to take a broader look at the writing and underlying messages from that loneliness video creators from part one. Again, if you haven't already seen it, this will be a little bit of spoilers of sorts. So I'm circling back to that discussion about that video because her wider public message gives us more context for the worldview behind her message to women. And I'll make the connection here back to women's loneliness and how it's justified. Thanks for staying with me here. Her broader writing shows central themes of midlife women, self-trust, distrust of male authority, caregiving, exhaustion, and disengaging from systems or relationships that feel extractive. As we can see from several titles in her Substack library, much of it is about the benefits of women that they get from being alone, and even sharing her own daily life experience as evidence. For example, articles like why more women in midlife are choosing peace over partnership. There's one here about returning to yourself and slowing down, and why women are quiet quitting their whole lives. So I want to make it clear that her message is not just about the one video that I analyzed in part one about opting out of relationships and what that has to do with being alone. And the article of hers that I want to focus on here is When Powerful Men Expect Their Authority to Remain Untouched, in which she discusses mistrust of men in positions of authority. Here, she's using an Epstein email story as a springboard for discussion. I'm not going to summarize the entire article, but the underlying message and her opinions that she's extracting from it. Her article is a broad critique of male doctors' authority, male professional networks, and women being conditioned by male doctors who challenge women's own beliefs about their health. Now, you may remember that this woman is or was a labor delivery nurse by profession, a profession in which she answers or answered to doctors. How many of them are or were men is only a guess. Let me put this into context. At her age, in her mid 60s or maybe a little bit later, and with likely 30 years or more as a nurse, it's not a stretch to say that she most likely has an associate's or a bachelor's degree in nursing. As someone who is incredibly familiar with higher education and education career pathways, I can confidently tell you that high school diplomas and 2-year degree pathways were extremely common for older generations of nurses like her. And using that to get a registered nurse license is much more difficult for younger nurses today. Now, I'll digress on that. But the point is, she's likely got a 2 or a 4-year degree, and she's reporting to doctors who spent 10 to 15 years earning their degrees and licenses. But to her, it's not about professional medical doctors correctly diagnosing or making healthcare decisions. It's about telling society that women should not listen to male doctors when they have their own intuition. This informs me that her message, the shared knowledge that she's now giving to women and her worldview for the betterment of women, is not just about how great it is to be being single. It's about distrusting men both personally and professionally. And it's about getting online to train other women, both young and old, to do the same. Her message about disengagement and distrust of male doctors stems from justifying her own bitterness, her own inadequacy, her stubbornness, and victim playing.
I've been married 3 times. I understand what they cost me. I'm just not interested in investing. They take your time, your energy. I've spent most of my life giving. I've been taking care of everyone. Disappointment, starting over.
She may look like the kind of grandma at Target who's looking for matching throw pillows to put on her Davenport. Give me a shout out if your parents or grandparents referred to their couch as a Davenport, like mine did. But the softness of her message and her presentation doesn't fool me one bit. It's exactly what we see from the new and upcoming divorcees on TikTok. Just with more gray hair, a quieter voice, a fatter belly, and the unearned empathy given to older women that we're not supposed to call out and criticize. Her message in the article is discomfort around male authority and male professional spaces by claiming that those systems protect men while asking women to ignore their own instincts. Flashing back to her video in which she stated,
At this point in my life, I'm just not interested in investing my peace into something that has a high probability of disrupting it.
I'm done with romantic relationships because I finally have peace. I do not want to carry someone else again, and I trust my own life now. I don't buy it. I don't buy it, not at all. I do not believe that she gave and gave and gave, and after 3 divorces, 3 failed marriages, she decided now that she's finally happy. Because everywhere you go, there you are. And for the hate watchers, go ahead and tell me I'm wrong. Tell me that she's correct in stating that she gave endlessly, and every interpersonal relationship from husbands to doctors was wrong, and none of it has anything to do with her own decisions, attitudes, and failures. In fact, let's see what research tells us about women like this. The grannies who report multiple incidences of marital disruption, remarriage, and relationship instability throughout their entire lives. The strongest research regarding those people is traits related to emotional instability, impulsivity, novelty seeking, and lower constraints. One of the most telling women-specific findings that I found was from Kurdick's 1990 work on divorce history and psychological symptoms. By the way, I don't have any evidence to support this because it would require a formal literature review. But my intuition tells me that there's far less about this topic today, and by that I mean women and their outcomes and things in this area, because academia and research in this area are overwhelmingly female. They're simply not going to snitch on themselves. Anyway, Kurdick reported that people with multiple divorces showed higher anxiety, distress, paranoid ideation, and several other things than people who were divorced once or not at all. And later summaries and research note that this finding held for men and for women, right? So from this, we can assert that for women with 3 divorces, like Grandma here, the likely personality traits would be something like a combination of dysfunctional attachment, poor partner selection, propensity for conflict escalation, low tolerance for compromise, overfunctioning, and caretaking, followed by resentment and weak boundaries. Now, back to her Substack article. Her message about relationships with men is not isolated to just her 3 husbands and how now opting out because men are a burden for her. It's part of a broader interpretive frame in which blaming men by disassociating from them is repeatedly described as growth and encouragement for other women to do the same. In her video, she says peace means not letting a man disrupt her home, her routines, her body, her emotions, her finances, or caregiving capacity. In the Substack article, she says discernment means not letting male expertise override women's patterns recognition, their discomfort, or their trust in themselves. Different topic, same structure. Both justifying disengagement from men and calling it a win. But when guys express it, they're asked, who hurt you? They're not allowed for their past and current experiences to guide their current and future decisions. When Granny does it, women rejoice. When you do it, you deserve every bit of sexist, patriarchal, woman-hating book that can be thrown at you. Her message on both YouTube and Substack is not simply, I personally don't want to date. It's part of a wider message where women are encouraged to distrust real authority from men, step away from relationships and those institutions, and justify withdrawal as healthy. That is exactly why this case study is important. When women disengage, the language becomes peace, transition, self-trust, and return to themselves. Again, when men disengage, the language is loneliness, avoidance, emotional failure, go fix yourself, and become somebody that women are more willing to tolerate. And I think her message is 100% on point with what Google says about male and female loneliness. Again, men need to fix themselves, and it's their fault. Women need men to fix themselves, and it's men's fault. Now, let me make clear that my point of this perhaps overly long-winded discussion is not that men and women should experience loneliness, solitude, dating fatigue, or relationship withdrawal in exactly the same way. I don't believe that they should. Men and women move throughout different life stages, social expectations, different role pressures and experiences, all of that, and they have different consequences when they step away from all of that. And I think that's okay. That's just fine. Let them. Let people do whatever they want, whether it's walking away or working harder to connect. Women may describe disengagement through feminine things like caretaking exhaustion, emotional labor, motherhood, marriage, or the feeling that they have spent decades being available to everyone but themselves. I get it. That can be real for them. But men have their own masculine reasons for opting out from women, and it deserves to be taken as seriously without being shamed, mocked, or translated into feminist ideology that makes women uncomfortable. Guys who step away from relationships or society because they're tired of providing, being a financial ATM, pursuing and chasing women, performing for them, taking all of those risks and carrying financial expectations, and then being treated as disposable should also be praised for taking control of their own health and well-being. That's the external locus of control that I've spoken about several times before, and having a healthy amount of it often leads to much better lives. Just like women, none of it means that guys are lonely. It does not mean that he's bitter or lacks emotional intelligence, or that he needs to be pushed back into a feminized society. Unfortunately, we hear that women who choose peace are empowered, but men who are broken. So let me give some encouragement for those of you who need to hear it today. For guys who have checked out or are checking out, it's okay to be honest about what kind of relationship, if any, you would actually improve your life. If it's better for your life and your mental well-being, then stop being or accepting roles that require you to provide, fix, or rescue someone else while simultaneously being told that you're being selfish. And if you are alone, it's okay to be honest with yourself about whether that solitude is helping or hurting you, and consider making some course corrections if needed. For both men and women, peace by way of disengagement can look similar from the outside, but we do it for very different reasons. And that's a real challenge that society is placing on men. If you are choosing solitude, make sure you do it from a place coming from strength. If you're choosing relationships, make sure that they add quality to your life, not because women and society tell you that you're toxic for not doing it. So let's continue this dialogue in the comments. My viewers are always great at adding to the discussion, and I really appreciate it. When a woman says that she's not lonely and that she's at peace, why is that so easy for people to believe? When a man says the same thing, why does the conversation turn to his contribution to the loneliness epidemic? And if men and women are allowed to be different, which I think they should be, why are men so often and easily chastised when their differences do not serve women's expectations? That's the part I want men to think about, because peace should not be a gender privilege. For more that explains all of this from a data-driven angle, check out this video from a few months ago. It's actually one of my best performing videos of all time. And here's my full playlist on psychology and relationships for men to listen to while you're walking, driving, or hell, maybe even at the gym. Thanks as always for sticking around to the end. Be careful out there, guys. I'll be back soon with more.